When FBI agents went to Gene Hackman's remote mansion, they were expecting a routine closure, not a revelation that would leave them speechless. Tonight, we'll hear more about the death of actor Gene Hackman and his wife Betsy Arakawa. What they found inside raised more questions than answers. Secrets that had been locked away for decades were revealed in a hidden room, and officials now think Hackman may have died 9 days before his body was found. There were also eerie clues that pointed to something much darker than anyone had imagined, not even Tucker Carlson, who is known for. The bodies of two-time Oscar winner Winter G. Hackman and his wife were found this week in their New Mexico home. A number of people have commented on the strange circumstances of Hackman's death, with his view adding to growing public suspicion that there's more to the story than meets the eye. What had the famous actor been hiding all these years? We're learning amazing new details about his death this hour, with his front door open and pills lying around on the floor. The investigation into the suspicious deaths of famous actor Gene Hackman and his wife Bethany, or Awa, continues. One dog was found dead in the closet while another was still alive on the property. As the investigation continues, one truth remains. This is a shocking discovery. Santa Fe, New Mexico, once a peaceful and quiet place, is now the center of an investigation that has sent shockwaves across the country. For their roles in Superman and The French Connection, his wife Betsy Arakawa was found dead next to him in his huge sun-drenched mansion. At first glance, the scene suggested a tragic accident, or maybe carbon monoxide poisoning. Initial reports said no foul play was suspected, and there was speculation that they were killed by carbon monoxide poisoning, a silent killer that had taken away 2 loved ones. But for FBI agents and forensic specialists searching through the house, some details didn't make sense. The front door was left ajar, which was a scary sign in a house that was supposed to be locked securely. A German Shepherd was also found dead, and 2 other dogs that looked healthy were found on the property outside. 2 of the couple's dogs were seen running around the property, and their frantic movements scared people who knew how well they were usually kept. A third dog, however, was found motionless in its crate, which was a scary sign that something terrible was going on inside the couple's bodies. Hackman was found near a back door with his cane and sunglasses lying next to him, as if he had fallen suddenly. Araki was found lying down in a bathroom with prescription bottles all over her for a long time. The scene was eerie. There were no clear signs of a fight or forced entry, but something felt off. At first, the police thought it might have been an accident, with one person having a medical emergency and the other in a coma. It wasn't long before people started to worry, but the timeline didn't quite make sense. The way their bodies were decomposing suggested they had been dead for days, maybe even longer, without anyone noticing. How could 2 people who were so full of life just disappear? With everyone watching, the investigation took a turn that no one could have seen coming. It wasn't just about the sudden and tragic deaths of Gene Hackman and his wife. It was about finding the truth behind the eerie details that just didn't add up. Who was Gene Hackman behind the people are still wondering who Gene Hackman was when he wasn't in front of the cameras? And more importantly, what really happened in his last days? The man behind the legend, Gene Hackman, never wanted to be in the spotlight in Hollywood. Even at the height of his career, he stayed away from the glitz and glamour, choosing privacy over fame. His strange and unsettling death has made people even more curious about who he was when he wasn't in front of the cameras. Could his choice to leave Hollywood hold the key to figuring out what really happened in his last days? Hackman was born on January 30, 1930 in San Bernardino. His early years were hard and uncertain. When Hackman was a boy, his father, a man he had once looked up to, left the family, teaching him that he had to rely on himself. That same determination got him through a military career, a string of bad jobs, and many rejections in Hollywood until he finally proved everyone wrong. Signing up at the Pasadena Playhouse was the start of his acting career. At this prestigious acting school, he hoped to improve his skills and prove himself, but even there he was met with doubt. One particularly harsh evaluation called him the student least likely to succeed, which would have broken a weaker man. But Hackman wasn't one to give up. If anything, it made him more determined. He kept going, taking on small roles and being turned down over and over again. The odds were against him, but Hackman had already spent his life defying them. His hard work finally paid off in 1967, when he got a big break in Bonnie and Clyde. His performance as Buck Barrow caught Hollywood's attention and started an amazing career, but it wasn't moving forward very quickly. That would change in 1967, when he got a part in Bonnie and Clyde. From there, he would become one of the most famous actors of his generation. giving unforgettable performances in movies like The French Connection and The Godfather. Unforgiven and Hackman's rise from a struggling young man to an Oscar-winning legend was a story of sheer willpower and resilience. But even as he cemented his place in cinematic history, with commanding and deeply human performances, there was always an air of mystery around him off-camera. He preferred privacy over the limelight, leaving Hollywood at the height of his career, which may be why the strange circumstances of his death are so puzzling. From the gritty streets of The French Connection in 1971, where he played the unyielding and morally complex detective Popey Doyle, to the calculated menace of Luther in Superman in 1978, Gene Hackman was a master of transformation. He was able to easily switch between roles that were in different genres, whether he was playing a lawman, a villain, or a deeply flawed anti-hero. Hackman's performances were intense in a way that no one else could have imagined. He won a second Academy Award for his role as the cruel sheriff Little Bill Daggett in Unforgiven 1992, cementing his reputation as one of the most versatile and commanding actors of his time. However, despite his on-screen bravado and the widespread praise that followed him, Hackman remained a mystery in Hollywood. He chose to live a quiet and private life in the serene landscapes of New Mexico, far from the high-profile social circles of Hollywood. Even at the height of his career, he didn't like the Hollywood lifestyle and would rather be alone at his southwestern retreat than at red carpets and industry parties. His decision to quit acting in 2004, leaving behind a career that many saw as its peak, added to the mystery surrounding him. While some stayed in the industry, Hackman rarely gave interviews and finally disappeared from the public eye. He retired from Hollywood in 2004, and he and his wife had lived a quiet, private life in New Mexico. He dedicated himself to writing and living alone in Santa Fe, New Mexico. For years, the entertainment industry wondered why a man at the height of his career would disappear so quickly. Was it just a desire for peace, or was there something he was trying to leave behind? Now that his sudden and mysterious death has happened, those questions have come up again with even more force. His desire to remain alone has only added to the rumors about his abrupt departure from Hollywood and his insistence on privacy. What was life really like for the famous actor in his self-imposed exile? Why did he leave the industry that praised him? Most importantly, could his quiet retreat hold hidden secrets that no one saw coming? Then the biggest twist of all happened. The FBI showed up at his house. Usually when an elderly, retired actor dies naturally, no one is investigated. But now that the suspicious deaths of famous actor Gene Hackman and his wife Betsy Arikanawa are being looked into, what were the federal agents looking for, and why were they so interested in what Hackman had left behind? As the investigation goes on, one thing is becoming painfully clear: this is not a normal case. The days before Gene Hackman died were as quiet as the life he had chosen for himself in his later years. He and his beloved wife Betsy spent their time in peaceful solitude, away from the flashing cameras and people who were interested in what he had left behind. Behind the stillness, something was changing. Hackman, who had been a formidable presence on screen and in real life, had started to show the effects of his age. His last public appearance in 2023 showed him walking with a cane, which was a stark contrast to the intimidating presence he had once projected on screen. His posture was still strong, but his steps were measured and careful. Those who saw him noted that his frame was thinner and his once dominant voice was now softer. Even then, his piercing eyes still had the intensity that had made him unforgettable, but those who knew him best were starting to notice small signs that something wasn't quite right. His health, when it wasn't in crisis, had been steadily getting worse. Arthritis made it hard to move, his eyesight was getting worse, and sometimes he seemed temporarily lost. Small memory lapses that were easy to brush off at first. Betsy, his devoted wife, stayed by his side to make sure his daily routine stayed as unbroken as possible. Then all of a sudden, they were both gone. When the news came out that Hackman and Betsy had been found dead in their home, the whole world was shocked. Gene Hackman and his wife Betsy had been found dead in their home in New Mexico. The circumstances were strange. Both had died on the same night with no clear cause. The first reports were carefully worded. No signs of foul play, but that made people think of other possibilities. His daughter Elizabeth was one of the first people to report them missing. There was a theory that Betsy had died of carbon monoxide poisoning. This was a plausible theory about a silent killer that had killed many people before investigators went through the house, testing every appliance and possible source of a leak. But there were no signs of carbon monoxide, no broken systems, and nothing else that could have caused such a tragedy. The theory was quickly thrown out, leaving a huge hole where answers should have been. The autopsy reports showed that Betsy had died naturally, with no problem. Hackman's body, on the other hand, told a different story. There was no heart attack, stroke, or other medical event that could immediately explain why he had died when he had. There were also no signs of trauma or internal conditions severe enough to have taken his life so suddenly. For all intents and purposes, there was no clear reason for his death that night. If it had been any other case, maybe people would have just chalked it up to the mysteries of old age. It was strange that both he and Betsy had died on the same night, but it made the circumstances of his death even more mysterious. Was it just a coincidence that they both died on the same night, or had something been weighing on him so much that his body finally gave out? Hackman's health had been a closely guarded secret that he rarely talked about with anyone outside of his immediate family. However, these were manageable conditions that would not have. As investigators looked into the details in search of a logical explanation, they came across a disturbing truth. Nothing made sense. There didn't seem to be a medical cause, the house was eerily still in the days before they found it, and other unsettling details at the scene all pointed to something much more mysterious. Even the fire department and gas company couldn't find any obvious signs of a gas leak or carbon monoxide. The autopsy, what doesn't make sense? The results ruled out the most obvious causes, but they didn't help much with the mystery. If carbon monoxide poisoning wasn't to blame and neither Hackman nor Betsy had any major medical events, then what exactly had happened in their home that night? Investigators had hoped that toxicology reports would help solve the case, but instead they made things even stranger. Betsy's system didn't have any dangerous amounts of prescription drugs, even though the investigators found several pill bottles next to Betsy's body, but neither of them had any signs of sedatives, alcohol, or drugs. There were also no signs of environmental toxins or foreign substances. It looked like Hackman, who had been in physically demanding jobs for decades, and Betsy, who was in good health for her age, had just stopped living. The more they looked into the details, the less sense it made. The man's body was found near a back entrance, with his cane and sunglasses lying next to him as if he had died. Betsy's body was found in the bathroom, near the counter where prescription bottles had been left open. At first it looked like she may have taken medicine and fallen down, but there were no drugs that could have killed her, so that theory fell apart. The fact that there was no clear cause of death left even experienced forensic specialists confused. The state of the house itself was also a mystery. Authorities thought the couple had been dead for at least a week before they were found, but no one had reported it. Even though Hackman and Betsy lived a quiet life, there were still signs of activity around the house. For example, the porch light flickered, a car moved slightly in the driveway, and a piece of mail was taken from the mailbox. Later, neighbors said they had noticed something strange in the days before the discovery. The house had been completely still, with no signs of life. The curtains stayed closed, the lights stayed the same, and the cars were still where they were the last time anyone had seen them. Then there was the most unsettling discovery of all. Hackman was known to be careful and methodical, even when it came to his home. He chose to live in a remote area for a reason. His privacy, safety, and routine were important to him, but when the police arrived, the front door was just slightly open, which made them wonder if someone had tried to leave but failed. Had someone entered or left? Or had there been an intruder? There were no signs of forced entry, missing items, or a struggle. Nothing made sense. The timeline also felt unsettlingly vague. When was the last time someone had talked to Hackman or Betsy? His daughter Elizabeth hadn't talked to her father in the days before he died, but that wasn't unusual. He had always valued his solitude and wanted to keep his life as private as possible. Friends and acquaintances who had tried to get in touch with him said that messages had gone unanswered, but that wasn't unusual. He had spent a lot of time alone. For decades, they stayed out of the public eye, but now that there was no clear cause of death, no evidence of foul play, and no good medical explanation, the lack of communication in those last days seemed like more than just a coincidence. The police had tried all of their usual explanations. There was no crime scene, and there was no reason why two healthy people should have died in their home on the same night for no apparent reason. There was a sense of unease among those closest to the investigation. Then the FBI found something they weren't expecting. In Hackman's private study, buried in a drawer of his writing desk, was a single sheet of paper with hastily written words that said, "It's coming, we can't stop it, I'm sorry." The ink was a little smudged and hard to read, like the person who wrote it had been shaking while writing it. Investigators stared at the message, unable to figure out what it meant. Had Hackman written those words in the days before his death? Did he know something no one else did? It was either the ramblings of a man who was confused or a chilling warning. Whatever the answer, if he wrote it, it was the last thing he ever did. Every day people die suddenly, sometimes their bodies just give out, sometimes answers never come. But something about this case felt different. It was the way that everything fit together just a little too well. Every natural explanation fell apart when it was looked at more closely. No single theory explained all the strange details that the investigation was supposed to clear up. It made people even less sure of what happened. For a man who had spent his whole life defying expectations, were his last moments just as mysterious? And if there was an answer, would anyone ever really know what happened? Since there weren't any clear answers, rumors spread quickly. One of the most talked about ideas was that Hackman and Betsy had chosen to end their lives together, in the privacy of their remote home. At first glance, this seemed like a tragic but deliberate choice. There were no signs of a struggle, a forced entry, or an outside cause of death. The couple had spent years avoiding publicity and living in almost complete isolation. Hackman, who used to be a dominant force on screen, had become frailer in his later years, and Betsy had been his quiet but steady presence, making sure his world stayed unbroken. Had they made a plan to end their lives on their own terms, the prescription bottles found near Betsy's body suggested she may have taken drugs. Then there was the contradiction. Toxicology reports showed that neither of them had any drugs that could have killed them. If they had planned to kill themselves, why was there no sign of ingestion, no overdose, and no clear cause? Another strange thing about where they were found was that in suicide pacts, the husband and wife are usually found together, often in the same room, where they died together. But Hackman was found near the back door, on the ground, while Betsy was in the bathroom. Near an open prescription bottle with pills scattered on the vanity, there was the most disturbing question of all. Why wasn't there a note? Most people who make such a choice, especially those with families and personal matters, leave something behind, like a letter, a message, or an explanation. Hackman and Betsy didn't leave any of that. They didn't leave any parting words, no financial arrangements, and no attempt to bring closure to those they left behind. Many people thought the biggest problem with the suicide theory was that it looked so much like an accident. The speculation grew when Hackman's mental state in his last months was thought about. The most unsettling truth was that when investigators went through Gene Hackman's secluded mansion, they didn't find any answers. There was no forced entry, no struggle, no toxic substances, and no clear reason why two people who seemed to be in good health had both died on the same day. When the FBI went to the mansion that night, they were looking for answers, but what they found there left them speechless and worried. The house seemed to have frozen in time. It was as if Hackman and Betsy had just disappeared, leaving behind only eerie reminders of their last days. As the investigation went on, it became clear that there were no simple answers. What was supposed to be a quiet, routine closure had turned into a puzzle with missing pieces. Nothing made sense, with toxicology reports coming back negative and no clear suspects. Medical cause of death investigators had to think about the disturbing possibility that Hackman had died of something intangible that an autopsy could not reveal. Friends had noticed that he was becoming more confused in the months before he died, having brief moments when he seemed lost in thought and disconnected from the present, as if he were troubled by something he couldn't express. Could he have been fighting a silent battle with cognitive decline? Betsy had always been his anchor, making sure that his days were steady and planned. She didn't tell anyone about her worries about his health. Had Betsy, who was always there for him, been afraid for his future and made a desperate choice to spare him pain? Or was it the other way around? Had Hackman, who was suffering from his illness or something that wasn't said or was too painful to say, decided to end his life and leave Betsy to follow? Or had his body just shut down from grief when he found out his wife had died without him? The FBI looked for anything that might have. Instead, they found silence, no last-minute confessions, and the eerie stillness of a house that was no longer alive. There was also a mysterious note that didn't help them figure out what Hackman was thinking in his last hours. Did he realize something that no one else would ever know? Some people think his past caught up with him, while others think that the fact that he and his wife died on the same night was fate in a way that science couldn't explain. The FBI found no clues. Unfortunately, there is still no proof to support or disprove any of the theories. For now, we only know that Gene Hackman and Betsy Araki were buried with the truth of what happened in that house. But maybe his last words, "It's coming, we can't stop it," were the only clues that people who found them still had. I'm sorry. No one would ever know what was coming or why he left those words behind. The answers died with him. What was Hackman trying to say, to tell us about? Could this have all been an accident, or was there something else going on? Let us know what you think below.